You're too old for me, Cassandra. I need someone younger, more vibrant. I stared at my husband of 12 years, Maxwell Peterson, wondering if I'd misheard him. The kitchen island between us might as well have been the Grand Canyon for all the distance I suddenly felt. Too old? I repeated, my voice embarrassingly thin. I'm 42, Max. Only 3 years older than you. He had the decency to look uncomfortable as he adjusted his designer tie, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. It's not just about numbers, Cass. It's about energy. Outlook. You're settling into middle age while I'm just hitting my stride professionally. I glanced down at the dinner I'd spent hours preparing, his favorite roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. It was meant to be a celebration. After 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder at Lancaster Financial, Max had finally been promoted to senior investment strategist. I'd planned to tell him I was scaling back my own consulting work to support his new role, which would involve more travel and entertaining. Is there someone else? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The late nights. The sudden interest in fitness. The new cologne. He had the audacity to look offended. This isn't about anyone else. This is about us not being compatible anymore. My laugh sounded hollow even to my own ears. After 12 years of marriage, you suddenly realized we're incompatible? Do you think I'm an idiot, Max? His expression hardened. See? This is exactly what I mean. The negativity. The accusations. Rebecca would never. He stopped abruptly, but the damage was done. Rebecca, I said flatly. Rebecca Shaw from accounting? The 27-year-old? Max's silence was confirmation enough. How long? I demanded. That's not important. How long? He sighed, running a hand through his meticulously styled hair. 6 months. But it only got serious recently. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Of me supporting his career while he built a life with someone else. Someone younger. I want a divorce, Cass, he said, his voice softening into what I recognized as his client pitch tone. I'm prepared to be generous. You can keep the house. I just want this to be amicable. Amicable. As if he were declining a dinner invitation instead of shattering our marriage. When were you planning to move out? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded despite the earthquake happening inside me. Tonight, actually. I've already packed some things. He gestured vaguely toward the garage. I'm staying at Rebecca's until I find a place. Her apartment is small, but... Spare me the details, I cut him off, unable to bear hearing about the cozy life he'd already begun with a woman 15 years my junior. Just go, Max. He looked relieved, as if he'd expected hysterics. Tears. Begging. Part of me wanted to give him that drama, to scream, to throw things, to make this harder for him than he was making it for me. But a deeper, stronger part refused to give him the satisfaction. Cassandra, he said, pausing at the kitchen doorway. I hope someday you'll understand this is for the best. You deserve someone who appreciates the phase of life you're in. The condescension in his voice broke something inside me. Get out, I whispered, hands clutching the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles went white. Just get out. After he left, I sank to the kitchen floor, still in the black cocktail dress I'd worn for our celebration. Our wedding photo stared down at me from the wall, Max and I beaming, impossibly young and hopeful. I'd been 30 then. Apparently still worthy of love. The tears came then, hot and violent. I cried for the years I'd invested. For the children we'd decided not to have because Max wanted to focus on his career first. For the betrayal that had been happening right under my nose while I planned dinner parties and managed our social calendar to support that same career. When the tears finally subsided, I picked myself up and did the only thing that made sense. I opened a bottle of our most expensive wine, a 1982 Bordeaux we'd been saving for a special occasion, and I drank it straight from the bottle while sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by the empty spaces where Max's things had been. It wasn't until the next morning, battling a spectacular hangover and scrolling through missed calls from concerned friends, that I noticed the invitation still sitting on the nightstand. The annual Lancaster Financial Gala, the company's most prestigious event of the year. Max and I had attended together for the past decade. This year, it would be happening just 3 weeks after he'd walked out. I picked up the heavy cream envelope, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. The honor of your presence is requested. I should have thrown it away. Should have deleted the reminder from my calendar and purged everything related to Lancaster Financial from my life. That would have been the sensible response. Instead, I found myself gripped by a very different impulse, one born of hurt, rage, and a defiance I hadn't known I possessed. Too old, am I? I murmured to my reflection in the bathroom mirror, taking in the signs of age Max had apparently found so distasteful. The slight creases around my eyes. The softer line of my jaw. In that moment, staring at my tear-stained face, I made a decision. I would attend that gala. Alone. And I would show Maxwell Peterson exactly what he had thrown away. Little did I know that decision would change everything. The 3 weeks before the Lancaster Financial Gala passed in a blur of legal consultations, awkward conversations with mutual friends, and tearful calls with my sister, Elena. He said you were too old? Elena had sputtered when I finally told her the reason for our separation. You? With your skin? Your figure? Is he clinically insane? Her outrage was comforting, but it couldn't erase the blow to my self-esteem. Every morning, I found myself scrutinizing my reflection with new, critical eyes. Had the lines around my mouth deepened overnight? Was that another gray hair? Had my neck always had that slight looseness? I'd never been particularly vain before. Now, I was obsessed with every perceived flaw, each one a possible reason for Max's rejection. You need to stop this, my best friend Diane insisted during our weekly lunch. He didn't leave because you aged. He left because he's a midlife crisis cliché. The young girlfriend. The lifestyle upgrade. I'm surprised he hasn't bought a sports car yet. She was right, of course. But logic offered little comfort against the voice in my head, Max's voice, whispering that I was past my prime. 2 days before the gala, I found myself in an upscale boutique downtown, trying on dresses I would never have considered before. Dresses that displayed more skin than I'd shown in years. Dresses meant for younger women. You look uncomfortable, the saleswoman observed as I tugged at a too-short hemline. I sighed, meeting her eyes in the mirror. She was close to my age, with stylish gray streaks in her dark hair and an air of effortless confidence. My husband left me for a younger woman, I admitted. I'm trying to. I don't know what I'm trying to do. She nodded, understanding immediately. Prove him wrong by becoming someone else. I've been there. She took the rejected dress from my hands. But can I offer some advice? The best revenge isn't looking younger. It's looking like the most magnificent version of exactly who you are. An hour later, I left with a dress unlike anything I'd ever owned. Not because it was inappropriately young, but because it was unapologetically bold. A deep emerald silk that complemented my auburn hair and hazel eyes, with a silhouette that emphasized my curves without trying to disguise my age. It was a dress that announced its wearer was not asking for approval. For the first time since Max left, I felt a flicker of genuine excitement. On the night of the gala, I almost lost my nerve. I stood in my bedroom, fully dressed and made up, but paralyzed. What was I thinking? I didn't belong at Lancaster's corporate events anymore. I was the soon-to-be ex-wife. The discard. Showing up would only invite pity or, worse, satisfaction from those who'd known about Max's affair. I was reaching for my phone to call a lift to Elena's house instead when it buzzed with a text from Diane. Don't you dare chicken out. I know you're standing there overthinking it. Get in the car. You've got this. I laughed despite myself. She knew me too well. On my way, I texted back, grabbing my clutch and keys. The Lancaster Financial Annual Gala was always a lavish affair, held at the historic Blackwood Hotel downtown. As I handed my keys to the valet and smoothed down my dress, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same anxiety that had plagued me at these events even when I'd attended as half of a secure married couple. Max had always been the social one, working the room while I smiled and nodded beside him. Tonight, I was on my own. I took a deep breath and ascended the steps, handing my invitation to the attendant at the door. The grand ballroom was already crowded, the air humming with conversation and laughter beneath the crystal chandeliers. I scanned the room instinctively, looking for Max's familiar form among the sea of dark suits. Cassandra? Is that you? I turned to find Daniel Lancaster himself standing beside me, the company's formidable CEO and Max's boss. At 55, Daniel had the distinguished look of a man comfortable with his power, silver threading through his dark hair, laugh lines framing intense blue eyes. We'd spoken at company functions over the years, but never in any meaningful way. Mr. Lancaster, I managed, extending my hand. Yes, it's me. Daniel, please, he insisted, taking my hand but looking perplexed. I'm surprised to see you here. I was under the impression. That is, Maxwell indicated you wouldn't be attending. Of course he had. Max had probably hoped to debut Rebecca without the awkwardness of his wife being present. I decided to come anyway, I said, lifting my chin slightly. I've always enjoyed these events. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, and I realized he was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. I see. Well, I'm glad you did. Would you care for a drink? Before I could respond, I spotted Max across the room, his arm around a slender blonde in a dress that could have been painted on. Rebecca. His expression when he saw me was almost comical, shock giving way to anger, then smoothing into a forced neutrality. Daniel followed my gaze, his own expression darkening. Ah. I begin to understand the situation more clearly. I tore my eyes away from Max, mortified. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. I should go. Nonsense, Daniel said firmly, placing a gentle hand on my elbow. You have every right to be here, Cassandra. Now, about that drink? I hesitated, then nodded. What did I have to lose? As Daniel guided me toward the bar, I felt Max's eyes following us. For the first time since he'd left, I felt a tiny spark of satisfaction replace the constant ache of rejection. The night progressed in a surreal haze. Instead of hovering on the edges of conversations as I usually did at these functions, I found myself at the center of attention as Daniel introduced me to colleagues and clients. He seemed determined to make sure I was comfortable, keeping up a steady stream of conversation that required little from me beyond occasional responses. "You don't have to babysit me," I said during a rare moment alone. "I'm sure you have more important people to talk to." Daniel's laugh was unexpected, a genuine, warm sound. "Actually, I can't think of anyone I'd rather be talking to. These events are usually an exercise in strategic mingling for me. It's refreshing to have a real conversation." I searched his face for signs of pity or insincerity but found none. Just interest. And something else I couldn't quite identify. "Besides," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "you've provided an excellent excuse to avoid the Thompson account representatives. They've been hounding me about fee restructuring all evening." I found myself laughing, the sound rusty from disuse. Had it really been only 3 weeks since I'd laughed genuinely? As the evening wore on, I became increasingly aware of Max watching us. His expression grew darker each time Daniel leaned in to hear something I said, each time I smiled at one of his comments. Twice, he seemed about to approach, but Rebecca's hand on his arm held him back. Around midnight, as the event was winding down, Daniel asked if I'd like to join him for a nightcap in the hotel's rooftop bar. Common sense told me to decline. I'd already achieved what I'd come for. I'd shown up, held my head high, proved I wouldn't be hiding in shame over Max's rejection. To go any further would be entering murky waters. But something in Daniel's expression, a mixture of hope and uncertainty that seemed out of place on the face of such a powerful man, made me nod. "I'd like that," I said. "Very much." The rooftop bar was quieter, with spectacular views of the city skyline. We found a secluded corner, and Daniel ordered us both whiskey, neat, no ice. "How did you know what I drink?" I asked, surprised. He smiled enigmatically. "I've noticed more about you over the years than you might think, Cassandra." The comment sent an unexpected flutter through me. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn center me. "I should apologize," Daniel said suddenly. "I've put you in an awkward position tonight. The gossip mill at Lancaster is already working overtime." I set down my glass. "You have nothing to apologize for. I came here knowing exactly what I was doing." Which was? Showing my soon-to-be ex-husband that I'm not going to disappear just because he's decided I'm past my expiration date, I admitted. The whiskey had loosened my tongue more than I'd intended. Daniel's expression hardened. "Is that what he told you? That you were too old for him?" I looked away, embarrassed to have revealed so much. "Something like that." "Then Maxwell is an even bigger fool than I thought," Daniel said, his voice low and intense. "And believe me, my opinion of him has already dropped considerably in recent weeks." I glanced up, surprised. "Because of the affair?" "Because of his work," Daniel clarified. "Though the personal and professional lapses in judgment seem to be connected. He's been distracted, making careless errors. The Thompson account, the one I mentioned earlier, he nearly lost it entirely last month with a miscalculation that a first-year analyst wouldn't have made." "I didn't know," I said quietly. Max had always painted himself as indispensable to Lancaster Financial. "The promotion to senior strategist was probationary," Daniel continued. "A chance for him to prove himself. So far, he's failing spectacularly." I should have felt upset on Max's behalf. Instead, I felt a vindictive satisfaction I barely recognized. That must be difficult for him. Max has always defined himself by his success. And by having a beautiful, supportive wife, Daniel added, watching me carefully. One he was eager to show off at every corporate function. Until recently. His directness caught me off guard. You noticed that? Cassandra, Daniel said, leaning forward, I've noticed you for years. Your intelligence. Your quiet confidence. The way you put everyone around you at ease while your husband took all the credit for his social successes. I stared at him, speechless. This man, this virtual stranger who happened to be my husband's boss, had seen me more clearly in our limited interactions than Max had in over a decade of marriage. I shouldn't be saying any of this, Daniel continued, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. It's completely inappropriate. You're going through a divorce. I'm your husband's employer. There are a dozen reasons why I should stop talking right now. But? I prompted, surprised by my own boldness. But I've spent too many years being careful. Making the safe, respectable choice. He met my eyes directly. And when I saw you walk into that ballroom tonight, looking like you could conquer the world with a single glance, I decided I was tired of being careful. The air between us seemed to crackle with possibility. I hadn't felt this kind of connection, this immediate, visceral understanding, in longer than I could remember. If ever. I'm a 42-year-old woman in the middle of a messy divorce, I said quietly. Hardly a safe choice. Daniel's smile was slow and deliberate. I never said you were safe, Cassandra. I said you were worth the risk. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine, an invitation, not a demand. After a moment's hesitation, I closed the distance between our fingers. Neither of us could have predicted what would happen next. How that single touch would spark a connection that would grow into something neither of us had expected to find at this stage of our lives. How Maxwell Peterson's cruel dismissal would lead me not to despair, but to a love deeper and more authentic than anything I'd known before. Or how, exactly 1 year later, I would find myself standing in the same Blackwood hotel, not as a guest at the Lancaster Financial Gala, but as Daniel's bride. Life, it seemed, had saved its best surprise for what Max had dismissively called my middle age. And I was just getting started. The month after the gala passed in a surreal blur. Daniel and I began seeing each other discreetly, dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants, quiet evenings at his penthouse apartment with its stunning view of the city skyline. We were cautious, mindful of the complicated situation with Max, the ongoing divorce proceedings, and Daniel's position as CEO. This isn't how I imagined starting a relationship, Daniel admitted one evening as we sat on his balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. Sneaking around like teenagers. I ran my finger along the rim of my glass, considering his words. Are we in a relationship? He looked surprised. Aren't we? I've seen you nearly every day for 3 weeks. I think about you constantly when we're apart. If that's not a relationship, then I've been doing this all wrong. His honesty disarmed me. After years of Max's emotional manipulation and half-truths, Daniel's straightforwardness was both refreshing and terrifying. It's just fast, I said carefully. I'm still legally married. The divorce won't be final for months. And there's your position to consider. Daniel set down his glass, his expression serious. If you're concerned about appearances, I understand. We can slow down. But I need you to know something, Cassandra. He took my hand, his touch sending familiar warmth through me. I've spent my entire adult life putting Lancaster Financial first. Building it from a regional firm to a national powerhouse. And I don't regret that dedication. But for the first time, I've found someone who matters more. My throat tightened with emotion. Daniel, you barely know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're intelligent, resilient, and kind-heartedly. I know you stayed in a marriage long after it stopped nurturing you. I know you have a quiet strength that outshines everyone in a room, though you don't seem to realize it. His blue eyes held mine intently. The rest, I look forward to discovering. If you'll let me. How could I resist such sincerity? Such conviction? In that moment, the age difference between us, the 13 years that had seemed significant when we first met, vanished completely. Daniel wasn't pursuing me despite my age, he valued me because of the wisdom and perspective those years had given me. Let's figure it out together, I said, turning my hand to lace my fingers with his. Day by day. He smiled, relieved. That's all I'm asking for. Of course, our bubble of privacy couldn't last forever. The first whispers began at Lancaster Financial shortly after Max returned from a week-long conference to find me having lunch with Daniel in his private office. His face had gone from shocked to livid in seconds, though he'd maintained a brittle professional demeanor until I left. What he'd said to Daniel afterward, I never knew directly. But by the end of the day, the entire company was buzzing with rumors. Is it true? Diane demanded over the phone that evening. Are you dating Daniel Lancaster? I sighed, sinking onto my sofa. How did you even hear about this? My cousin works in HR at Lancaster, remember? The whole place is ablaze with gossip. She paused. So? Is it true? Yes, I admitted. But it's more complicated than people are making it sound. It's not some vendetta against Max. Of course it's not, Diane cut me off. It's karma. Beautiful, perfect karma. Max trades you in for a younger model, then has to watch you upgrade to his boss. I couldn't have scripted it better myself. I winced at her characterization. That's not what this is about, Diane. Daniel and I connected. It wasn't planned. Oh, I know that, she said, her voice softening. You're not the type to use someone for revenge. But that doesn't mean the rest of us can't enjoy the poetic justice. The confrontation with Max came 2 days later. I was leaving my favorite coffee shop when I spotted him waiting beside my car, his expression thunderous. Really, Cassandra? My boss, he spat as I approached. Could you be any more obvious? I kept my voice level, despite the anger bubbling inside me. Hello to you too, Max. I don't believe I owe you any explanations about my personal life. You're still my wife, he hissed, stepping closer. We're still married. Legally, perhaps. But you ended our marriage the moment you started sleeping with Rebecca. I unlocked my car, refusing to show how much his proximity unnerved me. Besides, you made it very clear I was too old for you. Why does it matter who I spend time with now? His laugh was bitter. Don't play innocent. You're doing this to get back at me. To embarrass me at work. Not everything is about you, Max. I met his gaze directly. Though I'm not surprised you think so. He'll get tired of you, Max said, his voice dripping with disdain. Once the novelty wears off. Once he realizes you can't keep up with him. The words stung, hitting my deepest insecurities. But I refused to let him see that. That's the difference between Daniel and you, I said quietly. He values substance over novelty. Experience over youth. I opened my car door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have places to be. This isn't over, Cass, Max called as I slid into the driver's seat. You won't make a fool of me like this. I started the engine, rolling down the window to deliver a parting shot. You've done that all on your own, Max. All on your own. As I drove away, I caught his stunned expression in my rearview mirror. For the first time since he'd left, I felt not just anger or hurt, but something approaching pity. Max had thrown away a solid marriage for a fleeting infatuation with youth. And now he was watching me build something potentially more meaningful with a man he couldn't help but compare himself to. When I told Daniel about the confrontation that evening, his expression darkened. "Has he threatened you before?" he asked, his voice tightly controlled. "It wasn't a threat, exactly," I said, though Max's words had certainly felt threatening. "It was more posturing." Max has always hated losing control of a narrative. Daniel paced his living room, tension radiating from him. "I won't have him harassing you, Cassandra. I can't fire him for his personal choices, but I can ensure he maintains professional boundaries." I caught his hand, stopping his agitated movement. "Daniel, I appreciate your concern. But I can handle Max. I've been doing it for 12 years. He searched my face, then nodded reluctantly. "I know you can. You're the strongest person I know." He pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on the top of my head. "But you don't have to handle everything alone anymore. That's what partnership means." Partnership. The word resonated deeply. My marriage to Max had never felt like a true partnership. I'd supported his ambitions, managed our social life, created the perfect home environment, all while maintaining my own consulting career. But Max's goals had always taken priority. My needs had been secondary, if considered at all. With Daniel, everything felt different. He listened when I spoke. He asked about my work, my interests, my dreams, not out of politeness, but genuine curiosity. He valued my perspective and sought my advice on everything from business decisions to which tie to wear to an important meeting. For the first time, I felt truly seen and appreciated. Not as an accessory or a convenience, but as an equal. 6 months into our relationship, as my divorce proceedings with Max finally concluded, Daniel brought up the future. "Move in with me," he suggested one evening as we sat in his kitchen, preparing dinner together, another novelty, as Max had never shown interest in sharing domestic tasks. I paused in chopping vegetables. "Are you sure?" "That's a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything," he said, setting down the wooden spoon he'd been using to stir the sauce. "I love you, Cassandra. I want to build a life with you." The declaration shouldn't have surprised me. We'd been virtually inseparable for months. I'd stayed at his apartment more nights than at my own house. But hearing the words, "I love you," spoken with such certainty made my heart race. "I love you too," I admitted, the words coming easily because they were true. Truer than any I'd spoken to Max in the final years of our marriage. "But people will talk." Daniel laughed. "People are already talking. Has been since day one. Does it bother you?" I considered the question seriously. It used to. The idea of being gossip fodder, Max's ex moving on with his boss. The age difference. All of it. "And now?" Daniel prompted gently. "Now I realize those are other people's narratives. They have nothing to do with what's real between us." I smiled, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. "So yes. I'll move in with you." His answering smile was radiant. He pulled me into his arms, dinner temporarily forgotten. "You know," he murmured against my hair, "eventually I'm hoping to upgrade that offer to something more permanent." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you proposing to me while I'm holding a kitchen knife?" He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Not officially. Consider it advance notice. I believe in transparency in all business dealings. Is that what this is? A business dealing? I teased. The most important merger of my life, he replied, his voice turning serious despite the playful metaphor. And unlike most corporate consolidations, I'm hoping this one lasts forever. 4 months later, Daniel made good on his hint. His proposal wasn't grand or public, no restaurants, no audiences, no social media moment. Just the two of us on a weekend trip to the coast, walking along a deserted beach at sunset. He'd stopped suddenly, pulled a ring box from his pocket, and dropped to one knee in the sand. Cassandra Wheeler, he'd said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, you came into my life at a time when I'd resigned myself to success without true partnership. You've shown me what it means to be fully seen and accepted. Will you marry me? The ring was a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, not a traditional engagement stone, but perfectly suited to my taste. Another indication of how well he'd come to know me. Yes, I'd answered without hesitation. Absolutely yes. We decided on a small wedding, just family and close friends. Neither of us wanted the spectacle of a large event. We'd both been down that road before, Daniel with his first wife who had passed away 10 years earlier, me with Max. This time was about the commitment, not the celebration. Naturally, word spread quickly at Lancaster Financial. Most of Daniel's employees sent congratulations. A few looked askance at our relationship's origins but kept their opinions to themselves. And then there was Max. I hadn't seen him since our confrontation by my car. According to office gossip, filtered through Diane's cousin, he'd been keeping his head down, focusing on work, trying to rebuild his professional reputation after several costly mistakes. His relationship with Rebecca had ended almost as quickly as it had begun, another piece of information I received through the grapevine rather than directly. So I was surprised when his name appeared in my email inbox 3 weeks before the wedding. Cassandra. I heard about your engagement. Congratulations. I owe you an apology. The things I said when I left, about your age, about us being incompatible, they were lies. Convenient excuses to justify my own selfish behavior. The truth is, you were always too good for me. I was threatened by your intelligence, your competence, your quiet confidence. Instead of appreciating the amazing woman I married, I convinced myself I needed someone who made me feel superior rather than equal. I'm not writing this to try to win you back. That ship has sailed, and rightly so. I'm writing because I want you to know that my failure to appreciate you had nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with my own insecurities. I hope Daniel makes you happy. You deserve that and more. Max. I sat staring at the screen long after I'd finished reading, tears blurring my vision. Not tears of regret or longing, but of unexpected relief. After months of questioning my value, of wondering what I'd done wrong, of scrutinizing every new line on my face, Max's admission felt like the final piece falling into place. The last ghost of my marriage exorcised. I showed the email to Daniel that evening, unsure how he would react. He read it carefully, then set my laptop aside. How do you feel about this? Validated, I admitted. And a little sad that it took him losing me to realize what he had. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Some lessons come too late. I'm just grateful mine came in time to recognize what was right in front of me. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch achingly tender. You know, I should probably thank him someday. Thank Max? For what? For being foolish enough to let you go, Daniel said simply. His loss changed both our lives. For the better, I think. I leaned into his embrace, marveling at how differently things had turned out than I could have imagined that terrible night in my kitchen, when Max had deemed me too old for him. Too old. The phrase that had once cut so deeply now seemed absurd, almost laughable. Age had given me perspective, resilience, and the wisdom to recognize true partnership when I found it. It had prepared me for Daniel in ways my younger self could never have appreciated. Our wedding day dawned clear and perfect, a small miracle for October in New England. We held the ceremony in the garden of the historic inn we'd rented for the weekend, surrounded by fall foliage in brilliant reds and golds. I wore a champagne-colored silk dress that made no concessions to traditional bridal styles but made me feel absolutely radiant. Elena walked me down the aisle, looking stunning herself at 46. Daniel's eyes never left mine as I approached, his expression a mixture of awe and absolute certainty. As we exchanged vows, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain of rejection that had driven me to attend the Lancaster gala out of spite. The unexpected connection that had sparked between Daniel and me. The months of discovery and deepening love. I, Daniel, take you, Cassandra, to be my wife, he said, his voice carrying clearly to our small gathering of guests. I promise to cherish every moment with you, to honor your wisdom and strength, to support your dreams alongside my own. I promise to grow old with you, treasuring each line and silver hair as markers of a life well lived together. My eyes filled with tears at the deliberate reference to aging, not as something to fear or disguise, but as a shared journey to embrace. When it was my turn, my voice wavered with emotion but grew stronger with each word. I, Cassandra, take you, Daniel, to be my husband. I promise to stand with you as an equal partner, to share both challenges and joys, to value the perspective each new day brings us. I promise to love you fully and without reservation, grateful for the life experience that led us to each other at exactly the right time. As Daniel slid the wedding band onto my finger to join my sapphire engagement ring, I caught sight of an unexpected figure at the back of the gathered guests. Max. He hadn't been invited, but he stood there nonetheless, watching with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Our eyes met briefly across the garden. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even blessing. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the inn. I refocused on Daniel, on the man who was now my husband, and found I felt no confusion, no regret, only certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. At the reception afterward, as Daniel and I shared our first dance, he pulled me close and whispered, "Happy?" I looked up at him, at the laugh lines crinkling around his eyes, at the silver in his dark hair, at the face I'd come to love so deeply. Completely, I answered truthfully. You? Beyond words, Daniel said, his eyes crinkling with genuine happiness. I never imagined starting a new chapter at this stage of life. It feels like a gift I never knew to ask for. I rested my head against his chest as we swayed to the music, savoring the moment and the journey that had brought us here. Our honeymoon was a 2-week escape to the Amalfi Coast, a destination I'd always dreamed of visiting but Max had dismissed as too touristy. With Daniel, the experience was everything I'd imagined and more. We explored ancient villages, dined at tiny family-owned restaurants, and spent lazy mornings watching the Mediterranean from our balcony, planning adventures both immediate and distant. I want to see the northern lights with you, Daniel said one morning over espresso. And those gardens in Japan that you've been talking about. They bloom in spring, I replied, warmed by his attention to my casual mentions of places I longed to visit. We'd need to plan for next April. Then that's what we'll do, he said simply, making a note in his phone. What else is on your list? It was such a small thing, this interest in my dreams, this assumption that they were worth prioritizing. Yet it represented everything that made our relationship different from my years with Max. Returning home meant merging our lives in practical ways, combining households, establishing new routines, adjusting to sharing space after years of independence. We had disagreements, of course. Daniel was accustomed to making unilateral decisions. I sometimes retreated into accommodation rather than asserting my needs. But we navigated these differences with mutual respect and a commitment to genuine partnership. 6 months after our wedding, Lancaster Financial held its annual gala, the event where our story had begun. As we prepared to attend, I found myself contemplating the journey of the past 18 months. Nervous? Daniel asked, helping me fasten my necklace as I stood before the mirror. Not nervous, I replied, meeting his eyes in the reflection. Just reflecting on how much has changed since the last time we attended together. He pressed a kiss to my shoulder. All for the better, I'd say. The gala itself was a triumphant full circle. I entered the Blackwood Hotel ballroom not as Max's supportive wife or as a woman with something to prove, but as Daniel's equal partner. We moved through the crowd together, his hand warm against the small of my back, his pride in me evident in every introduction. When we encountered Max, now reinstated as a senior strategist after improving his performance, the interaction was surprisingly cordial. Time and perspective had softened the edges of our shared history. Congratulations again, he said, shaking Daniel's hand before turning to me. You look happy, Cass. I am, I replied simply. It was truth enough. Later that night, as Daniel and I stood on the same rooftop balcony where our story had truly begun, I couldn't help but smile at life's unpredictable path. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, pulling me closer against the night chill. That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings, I said. And that I'm exactly where, and when, I'm supposed to be. He kissed me then, deep and sure, a promise of all the years still ahead of us. Years we would embrace together, wrinkles, gray hairs, and all.